All right, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is our second conversation of the Black Banjo Renaissance Symposium, and I'll be in conversation with Don Flemons and Vinia Kennard. This panel is titled The Records We Keep, Race, Memory, and the Banjo Archives. So as I stated before, I'm working on my dissertation and a book right now studying the Black Banjo Renaissance, and I've spent a lot of time working in archives as well as doing ethnographic work. And one of the most influential archives that I visited, besides the Library of Congress, was the Southern Folklife Collection at UNC Chapel Hill, where I engaged deeply with some of the archival material that Dom had collected in some of the early parts of his career. The Southern Folklife Collection ultimately preserves materials documenting traditional and vernacular music and art and culture in the American South. But when I was working in that archive, engaging with those materials is not just engaging with stored information. And I've begun to understand these encounters as decisions that individuals are making, what people kept, what they named, what someone placed next to something else being intentional choices, and then also thinking about what they imagine that a future researcher like myself might learn from those materials. That experience led me to think about this book, Laura Helton's Scattered and Fugitive Things, where she looks at Black archives not just as storehouses of the past, but as active sites of imagining a Black future, experimenting with our lives, intellectual work, and also a space of political possibility. Through these eyes, I've come to see archiving as a deeply political act, where Black collectors like Dom and Vinia gather evidence of Black life in a world that repeatedly describes Black people as unlettered, ahistorical, or absent from a documentary record. And in response, they often do more work that proves that Black history existed, and will continue to become new. And they create spaces where we can begin interpreting Black life from our own intellectual worlds. And that distinction particularly matters here, because these are not just archives that we're sitting on top of right now at the library that contain representations of Blackness, but they are what some scholars might theorize as Black archives. Collections that are imagined by and for Black communities, where the act of collecting is bound up with the possibilities of Black beings. Therefore, the intellectual practice of thinking Black, as I think about with like Arthur Schoenberg's formulation, helps us measure our place in the world, not just through Black achievement, but also as part of a much broader history of Black cultural creation and connections with our ancestors. So this thinking Black also changes our relationships to time, and it asks us to see the past not as just a sequence of facts, but as something that's continually being interpreted, reinterpreted, curated, and remade in the present. And this is especially prevalent to the work that we're talking about today around banjo archiving and a few other forms of archives, which we'll get into, where we're looking at songs, gestures, photographs. We also end up looking at cattle records, physical banjos, handwritten notes, scribbled calendars as forms of archival evidence. And then also thinking about the other sources that we're engaging with these archives. So we're going to talk today about what it means to gather these materials, live with them, interpret them, and ultimately place them in institutions where future artists, researchers, families, and communities can encounter them. So today I'm here with Don Flemons, who is a songwriter, instrumentalist, historian, and researcher, and a collector who's also often known as the American songster. His work spans more than a century of American music and folklore, and he plays a ton of instruments, including the banjo, guitar, harmonica, jug, quills, you name it, he's probably put his hands on it at some point. Don was a founding member of the Carolina Chocolate Drops, before he began his solo career. And we are going to talk a little bit today about his 2018 Folkways album on Black Cowboys that mobilizes songs, poems, archival memories, but like also new archives in the curation of Black life. In addition to Dom, we're also going to be talking with Vinia Kennard, who is a curator, producer, writer, and photographer, business manager, and consultant. And she has been a long-term collaborator and partner with Dom. She's his manager, again, collaborator and partner, and she's played a central role in organizing and interpreting Don Flemon's materials, and also other materials like at Vanderbilt University, and also working on the album as well. She's also deeply engaged with preserving family history, which includes work on Black cowboys, Western pioneers, farmers, educators, preachers, and others. And together, Dom and Vania have developed exhibitions and programs across the country that connect music, material culture, and other forms of material together. And I'm particularly thinking about Westward Bound with American country music. So to start, I want to start with talking with Dom. So again, I first encountered part of your story as a collector in your collection of materials at the Southern Folklife Collection at UNC. So I'm curious, when did you start thinking about the things you were collecting over the years as an archive? Like I saw, correspondence, research notes, photos, posters, those sorts of things. So when did you start thinking of them as an archive, and how did you start putting them together as a curated collection?
Well, thank you so much, Joe, and it's such a pleasure to be here with everybody. Well, I was born in 1982 in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm African American on my father's side, and that part of the family came from eastern Texas and Arkansas, and my dad was born and raised in Flagstaff, Arizona, northern Arizona. And my grandfather was a sawmill worker and a preacher for the Church of God in Christ. So that was one side of my upbringing. I had a cousin who just actually recently passed away who told me that my grandfather's grandfather, so my great-great-grandfather, he was a fiddler in a square dance band of some sort in eastern Texas, which was something that sort of blew my mind. From the work I would do, it sort of brought me full circle in this really interesting way with my father's side. My mother, she's Mexican-American. And on her side of the family, we are sixth generation Arizona native, and my family goes back to the 1850s, around the time of the Gadsden Purchase, so really far back. And then her stepfather was an African American man by the name of Bill Dickey, who came from Pennsylvania. And so he was a fellow who started a program called the National Junior Minority Golf Scholarship. So he mentored people like Tiger Woods, and he knew a whole bunch of different folks like Danny Glover and all these different people, very, upper middle class people. So I had a wide variety of the black experience that I was learning about. And then his brother-in-law, Lincoln Ragsdale, was a Tuskegee Airman, and he was the first black millionaire in Phoenix. Not that money ever came to our family or anything, but that sense of a wide variety of what black people could do, how they lived, and the way that they engaged in the world was quite broad, and we were all race people that were trying to uplift the race. That was always the philosophy around the whole family. So the idea of documenting one's story was prominent in all of my family lines. So, everything from my grandfather having an old VHS camcorder he carried to church picnics that he would sell for $5, all the way down to my grandpa Bill having an archive now in the PGA Hall of Fame. So the idea of archiving was something that was always there. When it came to my own personal career, when I got to getting my degree at Northern Arizona University in English, I saw that there was an importance in being able to write down first-person accounts to any type of history. So, once I studied up on Chaucer and Shakespeare and the Harlem Renaissance and the beat poets and all these different types of poetry and literature. And then I started to study Appalachian balladry and all these different types of folk music. I saw that there was a power to that. And then in terms of video, I saw there was another way that you could document the stories, because then you could see how people performed. So that's how I left Arizona in 2005. I went to the Black Banjo Gathering. I met several different scholars, some of them that are here. Met C.C. Conway, met Alan Hart, I met Carrie Bletch, I met Greg Adams, Bob Winans, I met Sheikh Amala Jabate, I met Daniel Jatta, and a whole bunch of other folks. Joe Thompson, Aljamain Hinton, and Bela Fleck, who had just come back from Africa, and what would become the film and album Throw Down Your Heart. And each of them told me a little bit about the banjo's history. Laurent Dubois was mentioned, Pete Ross was there. Anyway, I could go on and on. You can look that up in the archives, who was there. But I talked to each of these scholars, and it inspired me so much that I sold everything I owned and left Arizona, jumped in a car, made my way out to North Carolina. That was also where I met Rhiannon over here in the third row. And, you know, she and I started the Carolina Chocolate Drops. I had seen that when I saw she and Justin playing the old-time string band music of Joe Thompson and his cousin Odell, who we never did meet, I saw there was a reactivation of a certain part of the string band tradition. And I felt that it was also important that in meeting Joe Thompson, the chance to get to spend time with him and engage with him was something that was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And so I came out saying, I'm going to study, document, and I'm going to disseminate as much information as I can about this string band music, whatever it might be for everybody. Shortly afterward, I got to meet Timothy Duffy, who was the very first manager for the Carolina Chocolate Drops, who started the Music Maker Foundation out in Hillsborough, North Carolina. He worked with Aljamain Hinton, also Etta Baker. Then also we had a period of time where he was working with Joe Thompson as well, and he also put out the very first Carolina Chocolate Drops records. And he was the first person to tell me that I should take all of these materials that at one point had been bouncing around the van. You know, they give you a bunch of programs and stuff when you're at the gig, but I was the one that realized that if I took all of the materials that we had gained through our shows and put them into an archive, that would mean something to somebody in the future. I didn't know exactly how it would manifest, but I knew it would mean something. At the same time, this is like 2005 or so social media and all those types of things were just sort of in their infancy at that time. And so I also was collecting local stories I would meet whenever I went to when I went to Ferrum College for the very first time, and I began to hear about all of the musicians who had been recorded on the Virginia Traditions records. You know, they had an LP collection in the back, and I bought them all for like $20 because nobody was collecting vinyl at that time. Then I would ask Roddy Moore, one of the folklorists there, is like, what was it like meeting all of these different musicians? And so I collected my own stories with that, and I just kept doing it. That was something that I thought was very important because I had seen the way that, you know, many times with other mentors of mine like Mike Seeger, he was very meticulous in keeping records and keeping a robust archive so that when it went out to the archive world, it meant something to that community that he was able to build. And I wanted to do my own sepia-toned version of what Mike had done, if I were to say it that way. It's a bit crass, but I felt like there hadn't been a lot of people that had taken the same type of role that Mike had taken with their documentation of black folklore. And so I decided to make my own archive, and it started at the Southern Folklife Collection.
Lovely, lovely. And so another important collection that you've also curated that's now living in an archival space is the Black Cowboy collection at Vanderbilt. So I'm curious, where did that come into the picture? And Vinia, how did you get involved with that project?
Sure. Well, I think I should maybe go back down memory lane for a little bit. And I would love to just share with you all how I met Dom and then how we sort of ended up here. You know, in 2015, I was living in Washington, D.C. I was actually working on Capitol Hill, just a few blocks down the road at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. And I met Dom actually at the Kennedy Center. He was doing a tribute to Leadbelly, and it was celebrating his legacy. And Dom was actually the host at the time. And my cousin Valerie June invited me to the show. And I didn't know Dom, or I didn't know anything about this music. But of course, Valerie invited me, so I wanted to support her. And after the show, I met Dom and met Tim Duffy as well. And Tim said, hey, you should get to know this lady. She seems awesome. And we exchanged numbers, and I do have that little piece of paper with his number on it. It's in the archives. And we started texting, and next thing you know, we went out on our first date. And honestly, everything he just told you, he told me on our first date. So I was like, wow, this is a very interesting person. And thought he was so fascinating. But it was really interesting because I was deeply immersed in politics, worked for President Obama, And I wasn't familiar with all of the amazing Black culture in connection to Black folk music and the Black banjo as well. So Dom was truly my introduction to this entire world and this entire community. And what I love about it is that when we started dating, he would tell me stories about Joe Thompson. He would tell me stories about the Black Banjo Gathering. And he exposed me to a lot of things just through conversations. And then he was like, hey, you should come visit me in North Carolina. And when I went into his house for the first time, it was like everything he had talked about was there in the living room. I was like, whoa, just everything related to the Black Banjo Gathering. I mean, he had banjos all over the room, photos, everything about, Black Americana and Black history. And I was so blown away. I think the first thing I said to you when I walked in was like, this needs to be in a museum. Like, we need to make sure this is all very safe. And so basically Dom said, hey, this is the world that I'm a part of. I know you're not familiar with it, but all I ask you is while we're dating, just please don't throw anything away, because I need to put it in the archives. And I thought that was a strange request. And so I said, hey, well, can I at least organize it? And because there was just
a light bulb went off there, as you can imagine.
Amazing items that we wanted to keep safe. But, that was in 2015. So by 2016, I ended up leaving my job on Capitol Hill and decided to move in with Dom in North Carolina. And we started, dating and working together and, of course, preserving the archives. So by the time I met him, he was also talking a lot about Black cowboys. And he was saying how much he was interested in doing an album with Smithsonian Folkways on Black cowboys. And my initial reaction was, hey, I want to help. I want to be a part of this. And my family background, they're from Texas and Mississippi and Arkansas and Louisiana and Virginia. And so I come from a strong Black cowboy culture and community within my own family. They were all ranchers. And me being from California, this was something that I really connected to. So from the moment we started working together, I knew it was important to document Dom, document myself documenting Dom, and then document all of the people that I was meeting as well. So we really, really wanted to build a massive archive. Like, our goal was to create a library's worth of material. And we were very intentional about all of the items that we were selecting. And the beautiful thing is, as we were traveling from 2016, or really 2015, all the way to now, we've met so many people who have basically said, hey, we want to give you this item so that you can put it in the archives because we trust that you will know what to do with it. And so preservation is huge for Dom and myself. Legacy is very important. And that was really how it all got started. So, everything that we've gotten a chance to do with Vanderbilt has started pretty much from day one. And I think now you have over 110 linear feet worth of items in the Vanderbilt collection. I think UNC Southern Folklife collection is a little bit smaller, but we'll work on that one too.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I appreciate what you mentioned about people trusting you with the material to interpret it, because I know that you all have been very intentional about building your own personal archives that are then going into institutions. But I'm curious, well, I already know the answer to this, but in what ways do you all interpret the material as well as just like giving people objects? Are you giving archives just a pile of stuff and being like, here, organize? Or what work are you doing before you even give it to collectors and librarians?
I think we'll have two different answers, but you go first.
Well, because we get material in kind of two different fashions. Now, there will be something really simple, like I do a bronze buckaroo show, and the bronze buckaroo was the first all-black cast singing cowboy film. So, I'll have someone, like there was a guy come up one time and he said, hey, I've got these photos I took of Herb Jeffries at his 100th birthday. And, and he had like about half a dozen photos. I really want to give these to you. So as you can imagine, that's very important for that. But it was kind of casual. Other times, it'll be something where there was a woman whose husband collected old sheet music, and a lot of it were coon songs and songs that had a much more racist nature to it, but he was an old-time mandolinist, so he appreciated ragtime and had a lot of the different material from a very earlier period. And she wasn't comfortable keeping it at the house, as you can imagine. But she also didn't want to just throw it away because it is historical material. So she said, well, I'd love to mail it to you because I know that you are a historian. You'll know how to contextualize this, and you'll be able to get it somewhere so that this historical, material won't be, just destroyed or thrown into the fire. And she sent maybe like 30 or 40 songs that were everything from, some of it more innocuous stuff, but other stuff was like James Bland, "Oh Them Golden Slippers," and a bunch of other really varied material from a long period of time of the sheet music era. So we kind of get it in two different ways, where there's more casual stuff, and then there's kind of more archival historian type of material. And then the third part, I guess, would be in the course of every time I do a research project, I write out all of my notes from the books so I don't have to constantly pull out my books all the time. So I have a raw notes document I make with every single quote that I get from any book that I am referencing. So as you can imagine, those documents can be quite long. And then when it comes to the final form, I've got 7,500 words to work with to get all of this 100 pages down to 40 pages or 30 pages or what have you. And so that's another part of the archive, is just the raw material that I collect. Like Black Cowboys is a never-ending endeavor, as you can imagine, because there's always a new book to be found somewhere, and then there are constantly new books being published on the subject of Black Cowboys, whether it's rodeos or side stories of cowboys, Pullman porters, buffalo soldiers, and things like that. And so those are a little bit of kind of three different ways the material comes in. And you have to treat all of them in some sort of fashion to be able to bring it into the archive. And at least, the archivists, they'll do it for you, but it's always great if you can give them at least one sense of what you're trying to accomplish. But Vania will know that because she knows how to translate it.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to be as organized as possible when it came to the archives, and specifically with Vanderbilt. So what I ended up doing was basically creating categories and looking at every single category as being important. Not every item, though, because every item has a different value depending on who's holding on to it. And so I had, months and months and months with all of Dom's items. And I spent a lot of time just trying to be as careful as possible in terms of placement and in terms of storage, and making sure that I understood what all of the items meant. So everything you see in Vanderbilt, I've seen, and I know what it is. I know the stories behind it. And Dom has had to explain a lot of it too, because some of the items he collected were actually before we met. And a lot of it, probably the majority of it, is from after we met, because I think with Dom being on stage, it's a little bit harder for him to, mix and mingle in the crowd. And so I tried really hard to gather a lot of items from the shows. But also in terms of research, we made sure to keep all of our drafts and all of our written documents. But one of the things I'm really excited about are all the instruments. And that was really hard for Dom to part with, because he had so many instruments. I think we gave Vanderbilt like over 50 instruments, maybe even more. And a lot of them you've played on stage with Carolina Chocolate Drops, of course, but also in your solo career. And so I think the hardest ones to part with were the banjos. And because a lot of them had signatures on them from different musicians who have been very influential to you as well. So when building the archive, it wasn't something that we came in with knowing Vanderbilt was going to happen. It was just being intentional from the start, saying everything is important, everything needs to be organized properly, and we just have to make sure that we continue to grow and build it. So even to this day, we're still building the archive, and it's never going to stop. We're going to always add to it. It's going to continue to grow, and it's something that we want everyone to have access to, including our family.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to just mention one other set of items, since you mentioned signatures, one other item to kind of personalize the collection in a way. I gave several, people that know me know I love collecting records. I gave some of my sentimental signed LPs away. Like the time that the Chocolate Drops opened for Odetta, I got Odetta to sign her album, Odetta Sings Ballads and Blues. And so, I gave that. There was a copy of Taj Mahal's Recycling the Blues and Other Related Stuff, which has a picture of he and Mississippi John Hurt on the cover. I did a Mississippi John Hurt program down in Avalon, Mississippi with his granddaughter. So everybody who was on the bill, from Guy Davis to Jesse Colin Young and Jim Question, it was a really great lineup. Everybody signed that, so I donated that down. And there was about, I don't know, there was about 24, and some of them are real personalized. Like John Sebastian, I had him sign my copy of the soundtrack to What's Up Tiger Lily, if you know that one, that Woody Allen movie very early on. The Lovin' Spoonful did the soundtrack, and he just wrote, "To Dom, like Taj said, when he first heard the drops, my job is done, signed, John Sebastian." And I thought that those are the sort of sentiments that I wanted to have in the collection as well, to show that it's not just a hands-off objective journey for me. There has been a personal side to it where folk music, in 2005, folk music was on a down. Now we have like Americana and all these types of music that are really pushing folkloric and roots-based music. But at that time, I remember going to the festival Stagecoach, and on a little side stage, Ian Tyson was playing, and everybody was looking at me like, "Why are you looking at this old guy playing this music?" And I said, "You all just stand out of the way. I'm going to go see Ian Tyson, because that means something to me personally." When I met Odetta, or when I met Leo Kotke, when I met Dave Van Ronk, all these people, they all meant something to me because I knew their records. And I'd make a point to say how much they moved me and how much they influenced me. And that's something I wanted to convey in the collection as well. And Vania did a great job of turning that into, it was mentioned before, again, you don't have time to explain it all like you're doing a talk. You have to be able to have it set in a concise manner so that people can translate it once it's out there in the collection without you there.
And also, one of the things that I've been really reflecting a lot, especially when it comes to the collection, is that it really is our story. It's the things that we've gotten to experience. It's the people we've met. It's a lot of the artwork that we've saved. And it's the story of our family, and it's the story of our relationship as well. And after we gave Vanderbilt our collection, they were like, "We need more personal items." A lot of it is based on Dom's solo career, but they really wanted us to dig a little bit deeper into our family archives. And so afterwards, I decided to go on a quest to basically reach out to all of my family members, and I told them about our Vanderbilt collection, and I said, "Hey, I want to see if you would like to join me on this journey and start adding more to the collection." And we did the same with Dom's family too. So we've been not only collecting for ourselves and our personal stories, but now we're reaching into our community to see who also wants to contribute as well.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I also find that framing, that intentional framework that you all put together when it comes to the materials, to be incredibly important from a research perspective. I'm thinking, I haven't spent as much time in the Vanderbilt collection, but in the Southern Folklife collection, I was able to even see diaries and journals that talked about, oh, we're on the road and this thing's a problem, and we got a flat tire, and yada, yada, yada. And then there's contracts in there, and then also set lists, draft set lists, things that were scrapped. And then you can start to really build a full picture of some of the life context of the work that's happening. So I also see in a lot of the work that y'all are doing, it's not just documenting and preserving, but I see some of the new creative practices to be in conversation with, and in some cases very intentionally aware of the fact that many of the materials that are being made now will then later on be archived by either you or someone else. And I saw a lot of that intentional work being in conversation with the archives in the Black Cowboys record that came out on Smithsonian Folkways. So I'm curious, could you all speak a little bit to how your archival knowledge and experience kind of came into play with the creation of the record, but also the materials that came along with it? And I'm specifically thinking about those 10 types that you had in the liner notes.
Absolutely. Well, the Black Cowboys album was such an incredible project that we got to do together. And, all throughout the way, we really wanted to curate almost like a music museum. And all of the photos in the liner notes booklet and the design and the writing of it, that all came from the two of us collaborating together. And one of the big ideas that Dom had was creating tintypes that would reflect the Black Western experience through our own interpretation of it. And so Dom, he of course had his giant 6-string banjo and his cool hat and the whole outfit, and he took so many different tintypes for, to depict the Western experience. And I did as well, because my family, they go back to Texas all the way into the 1800s. And so having a Western experience is something that is very close to me. And within that process, we didn't visualize doing an exhibit. That came later. But like you said, being intentional and making sure we have all of the items ready for that moment. When that moment came in 2020 for the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering, we were invited to curate a Black Cowboys exhibit in honor of their 35th anniversary. And really how it got started was we were on a phone call with the artistic director, and she mentioned we wanted to have a theme of Black cowboys. And of course, I started doing all this. I was just talking and giving all my ideas. And she, emailed me and said, hey, would you like to be the curatorial assistant? And from that moment on, I started to connect with all these different photographers all across the country. We started going deeper into our own research. We pulled out every single Black Cowboy book we had ever bought, every single Black Cowboys children book we had ever gotten, all of the different items, the cowboy boots, all the hats. And we started doing our own deeper research to see what else was out there. And we contacted Black Cowboy museums and really just started to immerse ourselves in the actual Black cowboy community that was currently living, along with the research that we had already found. And we put all of that together for Black Cowboys exhibit. And of course, we saved as much as we could so that we could then do it at other places as well. So the process has always been continuous for us.
Yeah, and two of the big highlights amongst the things like the books, which was interesting, was adult books, history books, and then children's books have all had different ways that they have handled Black cowboys over the generations now. And that was something that was really interesting to see. Once it was all laid out in front of us, it was like, wow, this is a variety of faces, places, and spaces, and different notions of what people think Black cowboys are and how they are manifested within the world. I'll just to back up just a little bit on the album itself. At that time, around 2010, I found a copy of The Negro Cowboys by Philip Everett, which was published in the mid-1960s. And that was when I first became aware of the idea that 1 in 4 cowboys who helped settle the West were African Americans, working alongside the Anglo cowboys, the Mexican vaqueros, and the Native American cowboys, and everybody out west. And it was around 2010, I guess, I saw that book originally. And then from there, I started collecting any book I could find. See, museums and record stores are my two big vices on the road. So I went, every time I would go to a Western museum, I happened to look to see what type of Black history they had in the gift shop. And I'd find one thing here and there. One thing on Buffalo Soldiers, Seminole Scouts, or Pullman Porters, or Bill Pickett, or Bass Reeves, or somebody like that. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be fantastic to have a single introductory piece that would give you what Black Cowboys means, so that you would have a conduit to be able to break into the whole story. And that's where the album's, the seeds first began. I kind of broke it into 4 different sections. There was Black Cowboy songs that we have stories about. There was Black cowboy blues. This is Texas blues, field hollers, and different types of material that would be connected into the cowboy story. And this was really influenced by the Deep River of Song collection and the album Black Texicans, put out by Rounder Records, because Alan Lomax goes into great length about this and that the liner notes to that book. So I wanted to figure out, how do I get that sound? Then there were more sort of, I don't know, ambient pieces, because I knew that I couldn't cover everything Black Cowboys in one single album. So like, there are a couple of different instrumental pieces. I did like a Tex-Mex version of Knox County Stomp from Louie Bluey to show Southern string band music going out west, or the March of Red River Valley, which is like a Mississippi fife and drum version of the song Red River Valley. So I had things like that. And then the fourth piece of it was writing new songs about larger-than-life characters of the West that I thought would be interesting to people, like Nat Love, who wrote his own autobiography, and Bill Pickett, the great rodeo rider, and then Bass Reeves, who I'm so glad to see has gotten so much acclaim since 2018 when the album came out. You know, and so you can imagine, it took me 8 years to get from point A to point Z with the album coming out. So I have this information. I meet Vania, who helps me be able to translate some of this down. By this point as well, the Chocolate Drops, we did one of the first modern tintype photos of a band with a photographer named Bill Stieber. It was featured in 2008 on the cover of Living Blues. Not many people were doing tintypes at that time, especially musicians, and so we set a trend for people to do that. Tim Duffy, he saw that session, and Music Maker being a photographic-based record label and preservation society, he wanted to start doing tintypes. So he eventually started to get his own tintype cameras and we were experimenting on different ways of doing tintypes, trying to come up with experimental means in which to capture this feel. So the Black Cowboys session came because when you think about the iconic images of the West, you think of Bill Pickett, and you think of Wild Bill Hickok, and you think of Jesse James, and all these images of tintypes. So I wanted to create several images that would showcase that. So I got a string band picture. I have a picture of me just sitting without my glasses, and it kind of gives me a different look just to take my glasses off with this particular technology. And so we did several of them, and then of course Vania took a picture that became a really iconic shot, almost more iconic than all the other ones in the liner notes. They gave her a full page. All of mine got little half pages.
Well, you know, when thinking about tintype photography, we treat it how we treat the archives. Everything is curated. So we're not just going in and taking a photo. We're really thinking about the symbolisms of everything we're doing inside the photo and how it will be, interpreted for future generations, because we're always thinking about how people view us now, but how they're going to view us in 100 years too.
And that was one of the things with the album. So I thought to myself, where could this album go? And my first thought was Smithsonian Folkways, because of their commitment to make sure no albums go out of print. That's how Black Cowboys is going to come into play. Because at that time, it was still sort of on the fence. People were like, Black Cowboys, what is this? And they weren't quite sure why I was doing this album. And so for me, I was like, I need to make sure that this is galvanized within the American landscape so it will never be forgotten. And that's why I put it into the African American Legacy series, which was in the partnership with the National Museum of African American History and Culture, because I played at the opening ceremonies at the museum just down the way, and I knew that Black Cowboys had to be a part of that story, because even in the museum, they had something about Nicodemus, Kansas, something about Porters, of course, with the train, and then a couple of pictures of cowboys, but they didn't have a section dedicated to Black Cowboys, and I thought it was odd, because it was such a big piece of the puzzle. And even for a big institution like that, to have, again, they have plenty that they have to display. So I thought to myself, now if Black Cowboys is in the gift shop, third round, they might come back to Black Cowboys. That was my goal. And then I'll mention one funny story, because Steven's right here. One of the songs that is one of the most iconic Black Cowboy stories and songs is Home on the Range. John Lomax mentions capturing this on a wax cylinder. And so I called up Steven. I said, Steven, I got to hear this original cylinder so I can do the melody exactly the way that it was learned. And Steven wrote me back and said, I'm sorry, but John Lomax left a note. And so he sent me an email back of a note that John Lomax had sent that's that actually had an article connected to it as well, that after recording the black cowboy who sang Home on the Range, it was transcribed by a blind music school teacher. And so the sheet music is the truest representation of that version of Home on the Range. But because it was played back so many times, the actual cylinder had crumpled into dust. And so there was no cylinder to be had. And so I started searching around the earliest recorded versions, and I found a version by Jules Verne Allen from New Mexico. And knowing he was the earliest version, I used his particular melody, which is a slight variation on the usual Home on the Range. And I created a unique arrangement for the way that Home on the Range is sung for the Black Cowboys album, because, you couldn't leave out the home, home on the range, because this early version is home, home on the range, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the sky is all cloudy all day. And it was a totally different melody. And so that type of research was part of the development of the music that you actually hear on the Black Cowboys album. And Stephen, of course, was so kind in giving me that source information, so that's what I was bringing with me when you actually hear the record. And so anyway, that's just one of 18 stories for all 18 tracks.
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much for that. And I appreciate this discussion that we're having about you all's intentional curation of archival materials. We've been talking about a lot of physical materials. We talked about that wax cylinder that had crumbled to dust. But I also think that there's more forms of archives than just these brick and mortar spaces that we call libraries and archives and things. And I think that there's also a space where memory is held within our own bodies. And a lot of the work that you all have done have helped sort of unearth some of these memories so that they can be re-embedded in the bodies of performers and practitioners. And I'm thinking about the D. Ford Bailey Legacy Festival that y'all put together, and also the Westward Bound exhibit at the Berkeley Public Library that happened a year ago, 2 years ago, something like that. So could you talk a little bit about your thoughts about bringing in those live musicians to work in conversation with the Westward Bound around the D. Ford Bailey Festival?
Absolutely. Well, for the D. Ford Bailey Legacy Festival, I was invited to be the curator, specifically at the Berkeley Public Library. And, I was invited to basically revamp the library in a way that would connect Black cowboy music to Black country music. And I thought this was amazing because it was also in conjunction with Dom curating the festival. So he got a chance to, select the musicians and pick who was going to play in honor of D. Ford Bailey, but I was going to be able to create an actual physical space that would also represent it as well. So on my end, we really leaned heavily on books, and we wanted to actually bring in our own books to the library because the library actually didn't have a lot of them. So we went into our own personal collection, and we brought as many books as we could that represented the Black cowboy experience and Black country music. And then we also had a lot of the vinyl records on display as well. So of course we had Cowboy Carter in there. We had Ray Charles country album. And so we combined all of it with a gigantic window display that had our cowboy boots in there and some physical items and hats. And that paired very nicely to the festival because in conjunction with the festival, we ended up becoming very good friends with D. Ford Bailey's daughter, Christine. And about a week prior to the festival, we got in touch with her, and we had never met her before. And she said, "When's the festival?" And we said, "Oh, it's in a week." And she said, "Oh, where's my plane ticket?" And so within that moment, we had to fly Christine out, and she's 88 years old, all the way to San Francisco from Chicago by herself. And she made it to the festival and had such a blast. And of course, we wanted to have Fantastic Negrito there, Jerron Paxton, Yasmin Williams was there,
Cedric Watson.
Cedric Watson. so many wonderful musicians, and we wanted to have a range of what Black country meant, and connecting it also to Black Western music, and all of that paid tribute to D. Ford Bailey. So as we're looking at our own archives and our collection at Vanderbilt, we're always looking at ways to engage the collection and curate exhibits or curate programs around it as well, so that it's also something that's like living and breathing, and it builds a lot of bridges between different communities. So I know we only have a few minutes too, but Tom wants to talk.
I'll dovetail just a little coda onto that. We got in touch with Christine because of David C. Morton, who actually wrote the biography of D. Ford Bailey, and it is supplemented by Charles K. Wolf's historic research, an excellent book on early Black string bands. If you're not familiar with D. Ford Bailey, he was an African-American harmonica player, very first Black star of country music through the Grand Ole Opry. But he grew up in a string band family, and this book has some amazing, amazing references to his early life. So David C. Morton, I had been keeping up with him every time they put a historical marker up for D. Ford Bailey, first in Nashville and then in Carthage, Tennessee. They did that recently. And then when they reprinted the biography I guess 2 years ago, I reached out to David and asked if I could do a forward, which he was so kind to let me engage in D. Ford Bailey's legacy in that way. He called me up, cold called, and said, "Hey Dom, I really love what you're doing, and I'm so glad that you're honoring D. Ford Bailey's legacy. I want to get you in touch with my dear friend Christine. She's D. Ford's youngest daughter, and she lives in Chicago." I said, "Wait a second, David. I live in Chicago." And he said, "Really? Well, I'm going to give you her number," because for him, he's an old guy from Alabama, so he always refers to him as Mr. Bailey. Mr. Bailey's daughter is gonna be a wonderful person for you to be in touch with. I really want you to meet her. And so that's when we called, and she just said, "Oh, you're going to honor my daddy's legacy? I'm ready. Let's go." And she got on her most sparkly cowboy duds and this sparkly cowboy hat, and was just the most pleasant woman to be around. And we gave her a seat at the table at a wonderful little cocktail reception, because it ended up being D. Ford Bailey's, what was it, his
25th birthday?
I think it was his 125th birthday the year that we did the Legacy Festival. So we honored her there, and then last December we had her come to the Grand Ole Opry, and she was acknowledged on stage. And it was the first time she had been there. Now get this. Now if you're a fan of the Grand Ole Opry, you know it usually has happened in the Ryman. Last time she had been to a Grand Ole Opry show was at the War Memorial Auditorium, which was the venue that preceded the Ryman. So it was her first time going to a Grand Ole Opry, and she even remembered it at the Bethel Baptist Church, which was the venue that even preceded that. So she got to go up there, and we got a chance to have her acknowledged on stage. So it was wonderful to be able to have a full circle moment of engaging not only in the history that goes back to when I was in Arizona and I first heard David's CD he put out, which has one of the few recordings of D. Ford Bailey playing the 5-string banjo, which turned me on to his legacy in a new way. But then to be able to come back and give something back to Christine herself, and now she's 90 years old, and just to be able to give back to her and to be able to bring her to the Grand Ole Opry, I mean, it was a very special moment.
And I will say also as well, in that moment when we met Christine, we pre-gamed it because, of course, we wanted it in the archives, but we decided to interview her as well at her house, and we took tons of photos, and we spent like 6 or 7 hours with her just getting to know her better. And to this day, we still talk to her all the time, and we even surprised her one day and just visited her and took her out to lunch. But one of the big goals for us was to capture that oral history interview, because she has so many memories of her father, And she also expressed feeling like she was going to be erased from his legacy because she noticed a lot of people don't mention her in passing in terms of the context of her father. So we made sure to take as many pictures with her as we could. We interviewed her both on audio and video, just in case. And then, she decided to give us some of his items as well, including one of D4 Bailey's harmonicas and tons of photos, and then her dissertation of her father, because she wanted to make sure that we kept it at Vanderbilt and we also preserved her legacy too. So over time, we've gotten more items for that specific.
And one final thing we did after that Opry, we actually grabbed my friend Bill Stieber, who I mentioned did those tintypes, and we brought her down to the Greenwood Cemetery, which is the historic black cemetery in Nashville. She visited her father's headstone for the very first, his grave, his headstone, for the very first time since 1982 when they laid him down. And we took tintypes of her, where she was standing with her father's gravestone right in the graveyard. It was a very special moment. And then, oddly enough, I looked across the way, and all the Fisk Jubilee singers are all buried right next to him. So Thomas W. Talley and all of them are directly across the way from D. Ford Bailey. So it was a very special moment, and again, to be able to engage in some of that deep history, which is the earliest black folkloric history, as scholars ourselves. You know, one of the things I found out is that only 2% of archives are curated by people of color. And to know that percentage is so low, our work is helping to do a great deed. And we can do it by doing great work, engaging, and being a part of all of these different archives. And it's not just proclamations, but it's doing the actual work. And that's what we try to do every single day.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Yeah, a round of applause for that. All right, so we do have a few minutes left to field a couple of questions. We'll just start over here with Dr. Dina. And there's a mic coming. Oh.
Hi, Dr. Dina.
Hi, it's so good to see you too again, and Joe. I have, first, thank you for the work that you're doing, because it's influencing the work that we're doing to build the Thang archive. And we thank you for the contribution that you made to our archive. This question I have for you, Vania. Can you speak a little bit about, and maybe you don't feel it as a tightrope, but I feel it as a tightrope when I want to bring something into an archive, but I have to kind of step myself out of it so I don't become part of the story of it. Can you talk about how you navigate that?
Absolutely. That's a very important question. And I'm so glad you asked that question because, you know, outside of everything that Dom has collected for his solo career, there's also the personal side of collecting and really trying to figure out what do you want to detach yourself away from is really, really hard. It's really hard to give to an archive, and I think that shouldn't be underestimated. And so one of the things that I've done, especially with a lot of the items that I've given to Vanderbilt, is just taking the time to remember all of those things associated with the items, and then reminding yourself that you're still alive and you can still see your archives and you can do things with it, even though they're currently not in your possession. And so that was something that I had to really figure out. And it was really hard to convince Dom to give a lot of his stuff to Vanderbilt. I mean, he gave 110 linear feet, but he could have probably given a lot more. It was hard. And it was hard for him because there was so much value to the experiences that he had personally, not just professionally. And so I've always encouraged people, like, don't rush to donate to an archive. Don't rush to give your archives away. Take as much time as you need to just recall all those memories and take it all in, and definitely donate in small doses. Like, if you try to give everything up front, it's very emotional.
And don't give away things you will use. That's the other thing I found too, because Sometimes it's because of items that I know I'm going to need. You know, when someone's asking for Caribbean banjo, something or other, there's items that I know I'm just going to need to have on me, and that can be difficult to figure that out.
On a funny note, I accidentally gave Vanderbilt one of Dom's Akubra hats, and I didn't even realize it. So this is the last one that he has. But don't worry, Vanderbilt's cool about it. So yes.
Question in the back.
Hi, my name is Tatiana Bryant, and I work in museums and archives. I'm really interested in learning about the process of working with Vanderbilt as far as selecting them as a partner. Did they approach you? Did you approach them? And what was the process of negotiating your rights as collectors? And what kinds of caveats did you include in your contracts, your deeds of gift with Vanderbilt, and how can that inform what everyone else in the audience who's also a collector is thinking about when they consider donating to an archive?
Absolutely. So Vanderbilt approached us through our former management, and they actually had a partnership with the National Museum of African American Music. And so they were in the process of developing sort of a more expansive section of their special collections library. And so when they reached out to us, we had a conversation and actually had dozens of conversations, really trying to figure out what items did they want in the collection. And we had to go through an entire process of actually vetting our own collection. So we had to know what we had first, and then we had to tell them what we would like to donate. So it was really a collaboration in many ways. And so I had to go in and write down every single item that we, in terms of categories, that we would be willing to donate. And then in terms of negotiations, we talked about how we can actually use the collection, because we didn't want to just give it to them and then walk away and it disappeared from us. But we also wanted to maintain the integrity of all the items. And so one of the things that we decided to do was we wanted to be able to tell the stories of the collection as we were going down there and visiting. So hopefully, you know, in the future we can continue to go down there and do our own oral history interviews. But, you know, the collaboration has been great in terms of being able to use the items for different exhibits, and they are going to help with all the different aspects of curating more exhibits in the future. So it's still an ongoing collaboration. It's not just like a one and done in terms of that.
And then, you know, just to kind of speak on one part of your question I think you were getting at is, well, Vania, you know, having worked in politics, she has a section of the collection that's connected to her work on the Hill, and she wasn't fully comfortable with having it all exposed to whatever researcher may come in. And you can create those caveats ahead of time. This is why it's very important to categorize and know the materials you're placing into the archive, because you can set caveats so that it's a dark collection for whatever section you think is something you want to wait until you've passed on, or you want it to, you know, kind of be out of the way for several years or whatnot. You know, and that's something that you can negotiate when you actually put the archives into the collection.
Yeah, and I know we're sort of limited on time, but we will be here afterwards if you want to talk a little bit more, or feel free to follow up with us on email. We'd love to talk more about the actual, like, you know, step one all the way down to all the different steps of how to start and build it. So feel free to use us as a resource if you're really...
It was a 4-month endeavor from the moment they asked all the way to actually getting the U-Haul truck.
Yeah, they were like, do you want to ship the boxes? We're like, no, we're going to need a U-Haul for that. So, yeah. But it was a really great opportunity, and they've been wonderful partners, so we're really thankful.
Yeah, feel free to come up. I can give you a business card, or theamericansongster@gmail.com. We try to make it really easy to be in touch, so feel free to reach out.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. That was especially one of the ones that I had. I would say, I know that we're out of time, but if you don't mind, I would love to invite Cece Conway to ask the question that she has coming.
So, Don, I wondered if you'd tell us some more, thank you, about buffaloes. So Zeke Roberts the black banjo player that I worked with the most, had a number of versions of Roustabout.
Yeah.
But only once did he play a version, and he called it Buffalo. And I think that's really interesting. And I wasn't smart enough to ask him to tell me more about the title. But I wondered if you'd talk about.
Well, the Buffalo song, I meditate on the Buffalo song because there's several. Okay, so this is an old-timey number where there's another variation that Elizabeth Cotton recorded called "Shoot That Buffalo," which is interrelated, and then on Bruce Baston's record, "Ain't Gonna Rain No More," Jamie Alston does another version of the song. It's just called Buffalo as well, and he does it on guitar. Now, what's interesting is as you go deeper into it, as mentioned in the previous panel, I think Christina might have mentioned that, is if you keep pushing and pushing on sort of what feels like the end of the information, sometimes you'll get a new piece of information out of it. And recently there was a biography of a fellow by the name of Beho Gray, who was a Native American banjo player who did banjo tricks and stuff like that. He played in the same 101 Wild West show as Bill Pickett. And so there are worlds of information that can be locked into a tune like Buffalo. Because it is fragmentary, it's hard to tell exactly where it comes from, but there is a world of, the Buffalo Soldiers are going from you can reach back to the Emancipation era, but it kind of the 1880s going into the First World War. There is a wide span of where the Buffalo Soldiers and where the sort of culture of the idea of buffaloes and hunting buffaloes and any different type of ephemera and culture around it can fit within the spectrum. And I'm sure that that's a part of what that family of tunes is all about. The Shoot That Buffalo song clearly seems like a little interesting number that sort of talks about, I don't know, it's almost like a game song in a certain type of way. Shoot that buffalo, which again, if you go into the history of it, there was actually shooting buffalo from the trains. So I'm not sure exactly if that's a reference to that part of Wild West history or not, but it's sort of an interesting fragment that we have left behind.
Is there something about the earliest Buffalo Soldiers that comes to mind?
Well, one of the things I found when it came to Buffalo Soldiers, in terms of, one of the interesting pieces of history I found was in Wyoming. They had some of the very first black legislators elected into office in the state of Wyoming, and so when you're hearing a song like "Goodbye Old Pain, I'm Leaving Cheyenne," Wyoming was one of the very first places that had their own freed black enclave that was electing their own legislators. So I don't know if, again, these are sort of histories that have these thin lines that could tell you a little something about that. So there's always a little bit to it,
Yeah, and it's also, I'll quit now. Those of you who know Frank X. Walker's work, Buffalo Dance, is about the enslaved man who went with Lewis and Clark. He was enslaved to Clark and became called Buffalo by some of the Native Americans, and without whom, it's a beautiful, beautiful collection of poetry. And without, anyway, just read one of them sometime.
Sure, York's story is always worth knowing as well. An amazing individual who, should definitely be talked about more. But we can't go deeper into it, unfortunately, Cece. But yeah, I think about that tune a whole bunch anyway.
Yeah,
I know Joe,
for sure. I just wanted to make sure we're respecting the time. But thank you so much for this conversation. Let's thank Dom and Vinia again.
Thank you so much.